All right, guys, welcome. Today is asynchronous. It kind of sucks. I know. Hope you're all staying safe. All right, but remember, your Chapter 17 outline is due. Please make sure to turn it in. And then take about 15 minutes. That should be all that it takes you. If you haven't already, that was your first prompt on the Google site. So if you did this already, good on you. But if not, make sure the first thing that you're supposed to do is you're supposed to use that PDF reading and video link, and the video link's on the PDF, to finish the comparison chart in your agricultural revolution that you guys started at the end of last class. Okay, so make sure you finish that and submit that first, and then we are going to move on. Okay, so what we're going to do, instead of taking a ton of notes, a lot of this is expanding and furthering and linking kind of what we did about when we worked with like the commercial revolution, etc. All right, so we're going to do an asynchronous Jamboard. So we did a Jamboard last class, and so we can still do it. It's just that your stickies are going to come in at different times. All right, so we're going to talk about stuff, and then oh, hello Minerva, my cat just came to join me. And then we'll talk about stuff. I'll tell you to write a sticky. We'll talk about stuff. I'll tell you to write a sticky. And so clearly you're watching this pre-recorded video, and you'll be doing your stickies at your own pace, but that's still fine. It's still useful. Okay. So theme: importation and transplantation of agricultural products from the Americas contributed to an increase in the food supply in Europe. Okay. So answer on Jamboard. What I want you guys to do is go ahead and open up your Jamboard. All right, so go to the Google site, find your Jamboard. All right, and you should be on slide 1 of the Jamboard. Okay, and there should be a sticky to the left that says, what are some of the new staple crops from the Americas, and how could they help all of Europe's diet, but especially the poor? All right, what are some of the new staple crops from the Americas, and how could they help all of Europe's diet, especially though the poor? So answer that first sticky on the left, and what you guys are going to do, you're going to create the sticky, and if you could rearrange your own stickies, since I'm not going to be monitoring it 24/7, keep those stickies lined up on the left. All right, move those stickies around and just answer that first question on the left. I'll give you some hints. 2 of the important ones should begin with a T and a P. T and a P. Think of some new staple crops, especially coming from the Americas, and how do they help Europe's diet? All right, especially the poor. Do that sticky now. Pause me, do the sticky, then come back. Okay, so hopefully you paused and came back, and then let me see. All right, well, and that's the question right there. What are some of the new staple crops? All right, so hopefully we looked at that sticky. And the next question is, how could this increase the food supply aside from just bringing in more food? So what I'm asking you guys to focus on is, of course, the fact that they are bringing stuff from the Americas increases the food supply. But now that they have new crops, how can this generate a larger food supply in general? And I kind of want you to focus on the turnip. Think about the turnip and agriculture and how the turnip was used. Maybe this should be coming from your agricultural revolution. So go back to the Jamboard, and on the first slide on the Jamboard, go back to your Jamboard, and on the first slide to the right says, that's your other sticky. How could this increase the food supply aside from the fact they're just bringing in more food from the Americas? So how are these new crops being used in Europe and being cultivated to create more food? And I'm kind of prompting you to think about the turnip, okay? So go ahead, pause this, and answer that sticky on the Jamboard. So still slide 1, but the right side of the Jamboard. Pause me, go ahead. All right, hopefully we're back. So you have done slide 1 of Jamboard. Let us now look here, okay? Doo-doot. So here we have this source. Sugar, certainly not only a useful and palatable, but even a most wholesome article of domestic use. But at the same time, it is evidently no more a necessary of life than oil, vinegar, or mustard. And it is ludicrous enough to observe that the very same papers which represent sugar as a necessary, so papers as in like newspapers. So they're saying there's like stuff in the newspapers that are like, oh my God, you need sugar. It's necessary to life. And assign that as a reason why measures should be adopted to lower its price, contain paragraphs lavishly praising the philanthropy of different societies who have combined for the express purpose of giving up the entire use of this same absolute necessary of life. Okay. So a little explanation over here to the right. Before, sugar was a staple in all classes, because when we talk about the Industrial Revolution in Europe, we're going to see how tea and sugar is this interesting phenomenon where a luxury item suddenly became available and a necessary staple in all homes. It didn't used to be that way. All right, so before, sugar was a staple in all classes' diets during the Industrial Revolution. It was used for elaborate decoration and consumption of the wealthier classes. So during absolutism and the absolutism era, like think Palace of Versailles and all of the parties Louis is throwing for his nobles who are getting deperked in the government, but he's throwing all of these parties to make them kind of placated and reinforce at least their social status still reigns supreme. And at some of these parties, they will have elaborate marzipan structures. Marzipan is essentially a hard sugar paste. And so sugar is so expensive, and marzipan is so hard that it's really hard to consume. So basically these are statues made out of marzipan just for decoration. They don't even eat the sugar. Okay. So how does the document show some New World crops? All right. Okay. Although not grown in the Old World. So technically sugar originated in the Old World. All right. But it is essentially grown in the New World. All right. So basically, how does sugar and some of these crops being cultivated in the Americas change society of Europe? And we're going to answer this on the Jamboard. So once again, go to the Jamboard, but now click to the next slide, slide 2. All right, and says, how does the document show some of these crops, mainly sugar, change society of Europe, or at least trigger or start or show that society is changing? How does sugar show that society is possibly changing inside of Europe? So once again, pause me and create these stickies and move them around so they fit. Pause me and go ahead and do that sticky on the Jamboard. All right, hopefully we're back. Labor and trade in commodities were increasingly freed from traditional restriction imposed by governments and corporate entities. Okay, so we are showing how there is this interesting shift happening during this time of the 16 to 1700s. So we have absolutism, and you have these mercantilist policies where the government is overseeing and operating, and yet as absolutism starts to fade or be challenged, and we're going to see this move into the Enlightenment period, we're going to see how labor and trade in commodities are freed from these traditional restrictions imposed by hardcore absolutism, even enlightened absolutism, or as our constitutional monarchies reaffirm and the supremacy of parliament happens in places like England, in the Dutch Republic, etc. Okay, so I want you to think about the enclosure movement. All right, so we talked about the enclosure movement prior. You might have had a refresher during the agricultural revolution, but if you need to, go back to your notes we did a while ago on the commercial revolution and look at the enclosure movement, or you can even look in your textbook. But how would the enclosure movement be an example of this? How were these enclosures, and now the people who suddenly have more reign over their land and how to purpose agriculture, how does this show that traditional labor and trade commodities are freed from traditional restrictions? So another Jamboard instead of notes. instead of notes. Go to slide 3. Go to slide 3 and write your sticky. How would the enclosure, you see the sticky said, how would the enclosure movement be an example of this? So how does the enclosure movement show this freedom from traditional restrictions? Answer the sticky on the slide 3 of the Jamboard. Pause me and do that. All right, this next one, yeah, I did make a Jamboard for this one. I just forgot. So by 1750, and keep in mind, this is the height of the transatlantic slave trade. This is height of the plantation system in the Americas. By 1750, England exported 15% of its agricultural output. What? So they are sending an excess, a surplus of goods. So 15% of its agricultural output is being exported elsewhere. So now reaffirm or meld together some of the ideas and tell me, how would the enclosure movement and these new crops like potatoes, like turnips from the Americas or being cultivated in the Americas aid this? So go to slide 4. Go to slide 4 of the Jamboard and tell me, how would the enclosure movement and new crops from the Americas aid or support or tell us why 15% of its agricultural output was exported? Okay, so pause me and do your slide 4 Jamboard sticky. Okay, next. Labor and trade in commodities, same theme. Labor and trade in commodities were increasingly freed from traditional restrictions imposed by governments and corporate entities. So how would the evidence below be used to support the statement above? So in a second, so these are 3 statements: benign neglect in the colonies, no international tariffs, and the Act of Union. This idea that not the idea, the official act where the Kingdom of Great Britain is created. So England, Scotland, and Wales are now underneath the Kingdom of Great Britain, which is the Act of Union in 1707. So how would these 3 help create or prove or support this idea that labor and trade and commodities were increasingly freed? So take a look, don't pause me, but go to the Jamboard, because let me explain how I want you to do it on the Jamboard. Go to slide 5 of the Jamboard, and you will see that there are 3 stickies: benign neglect in colonies, no international tariffs, and the Act of Union. So when you're going to create a sticky for each one of these columns, and so try to match the color. When you're answering benign neglect, create a pink sticky. When you're answering no internal tariffs, create an orange sticky. And when you're doing the one about the Act of Union, create a yellow sticky. And I'm sure as we get more and more answers, they might have to overlap. That's fine. I will sort through them, but shuffle them around as you will, okay? And I'm going to give you a little hint for the Act of Union. Think about how which of these regions saw a lot of the enclosure movement? Where was the enclosure movement in these regions? And how would that have to do with the Act of Union and supporting these labor policies? Okay, so go ahead and pause me and do those 3 stickies. All right, hopefully you are now done with that. Let's go to the next one. This one you're just listening. All right, I'm going to introduce this demographic revolution, and I will reference it again when we finally get to the industrial revolution, machines and modernization. So the enclosure movement forced a lot of workers off their land. And yet all of this food supply is growing our population. And so all of these people are now, there's a lot of people, but they don't have a lot of farms to work on. And this cottage industry only holds so many people. And so this is going to slowly shift us into the Industrial Revolution. because you need the agricultural revolution and this demographic revolution to support our up and coming industrial revolution. We need a lot of people, and we need a lot of people in cities. And the reason we have a lot of people is because of the agricultural revolution. We have a lot more food, and we have a lot of people suddenly moving to cities because of the enclosure movement. And what this causes, or a few of intertwined things that happen, all right? Overall, we start to get improved health and life expectancy. And now I'm not talking by modern standards. I'm talking about the standards at this time period. There's still a lot of poor. There's still going to be diseases and epidemics, all right? But we start to get the exploration of vaccinations. We start to get fewer epidemics because of this. And the more and more that people start to go into cities is the more and more governments start to realize that we might need to improve sanitation in our cities, because there are studies, scientists start to say, oh, the outbreak of these diseases are interlinked with the fact that the people who get the most diseases are living right next to our waste and refuge dumps where all of the poop and pee is and our feces are. So, hey, maybe disease is linked to the fact that we have poor sanitation. So cities start to build infrastructure with better sanitation. Um, and eventually we get fewer and less devastating wars. Cotton clothing is lighter, more affordable, so people start to have better ways to clothe themselves. And the fact that it's more affordable means that you can make more jackets and other things that you need to in winter, even though, I mean, sure, wool will still be used for coats and winter items as well. Um, and in some instances, we will have earlier marriages and more kids. But overall, the improved diets are really going to help as well. We have better food with more calories, like the potato, that will help people's diets and keep them better fed. And we also want to keep in mind that we are developing this market economy led by new financial practices and institutions. So, I mean, we started to get insurance because of the colonies. These joint stock companies wanted to reduce their risks. So, a joint stock company, of course, reduces the risks, but people also start to want insurance. So they start to take out insurance policies on their ships, on their trade, and that insurance will extend to other regions as well. And banking institutions have already existed. I mean, we had our early private banks in Florence and in other areas. But eventually, and that's this Bank of England thing down here, all right, not only do we get more banks, and banks are being used more frequently to turn private savings into venture capital. Venture capital meaning, hey, I'm going to invest in something having to do with the colonies, or I'm going to invest in these early precursor inventions, canal building, railroad building of the Industrial Revolution. But also, some of these banks are now not just private banks, but we start to have banks backed by governments, i.e., one of the major ones is the Bank of England. And we also get new definitions of property rights and protection against confiscation. So, as in the into the 1700s, largely moving into the 1700s, absolutism, particularly in England because of their constitutional monarchy, which is going to be why the Industrial Revolution, one of many reasons why the Industrial Revolution starts in England. But the protection of private property is a necessary for venture capital, and why the Industrial Revolutions will start there. So in some of our states in Europe who start to protect private property earlier, that's going to help these industrial endeavors, all right? Or in places where we have enlightened absolutism, looking in Prussia, early Germany, the state will also venture into this, all right? So there, of course, will be state-funded industrial revolution. In Russia with the railroads, So there will be nuance there, and we will definitely talk about that. So how did, Minerva, you're sitting on my hair. My cat is sitting on my hair. Oh my God, Minerva. Oh my God. Okay, sorry. She sat on my hair, so I would pet her. Cats. So how did early modern Europe develop this market economy that provided the foundation for its global role? All right. So real quick, a difference between a market economy and a planned economy. So market economies tend to be what we talk about when we talk about capitalist nations, where planned economies are where we talk about more when we're talking about communism, um, type governments. All right. So a market economy is where there is more free will for people to make their own decisions, and this protection of the private property, etc. Where in there's a lot of control in a planned economy, and the government oh my God, I'm sorry, my cat is being really obnoxious and distracting me. Minerva, I'm trying to be a teacher. Goodness gracious. So the planned economy has a lot more control. We'll talk definitely more about this dichotomy between communism and capitalism to moving in to the later parts of period 2 and the earlier parts of period 3. Oh, and there is a Jamboard. So go to your Jamboard, okay? Go to slide 6, and how would a market economy prepare Europe for its global role? So think of some of these future events that I told you are soon to come in our 17 and 1800s. So how would a market economy, how would free will prepare Europe for its global role? So please create your sticky for slide 6. Pause me and come back. Hello, Minerva. All right, hopefully we're back. Let's move on. So here is this source, and I'm not gonna read the whole source, all right? I'm just gonna tell you what you guys are gonna do on the Jamboard. You guys are gonna read this source, and then on the Jamboard, slide 7, there are 2 stickies. And just like you did on one of our other Jamboards, when you're answering the question on the left, could you make it a yellow sticky? And when you're answering the question on the right, will you make it a pink sticky? But the yellow sticky asks, what are some causes of the, quote, increased graphic mobility in the source mentions? So what are some causes for why people are moving inside of Europe? What are some things that are forcing people to leave? And then the pink question, identify the countries the author is talking about in the pink highlighted statement. Make sure to say what country goes with what. So it's saying internally Europe divided more and more sharply between societies engaging in overseas trade and those primarily in Central and Eastern Europe with little such involvement. So tell me which countries are engaging in overseas trade and having these economic transformations, and those in Central and Eastern Europe with little such involvement. So pause me, answer those 2 questions. And now, if you have made it this far, woo, make sure on slide 8 of the Jamboard it says sign in. Prove to me that you did the Jamboard. So create a sticky with your name, please, so I know that you did the Jamboard. And then you are now done with my video lecture. All right, please complete the activity CCOT Economic Developments from 1648 to 1815. All right. Ideally, this is supposed to be done today on Thursday, but I realize there is a tropical storm. So if you need to do it another day, that is acceptable. However, on Thursday, because I'm recording this on Wednesday, on Thursday, I will be creating your review guide for your test. So your review for the test should be up on Thursday when you are hopefully completing this. All right. So I will give you through Saturday and Sunday to finish the activities here, but it really should be done Thursday. And the only reason I'm giving you said leeway is in case for some reason there are power outage. But really do not procrastinate because, as I said, you're going to be having a study guide and you need to be taking Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, or one of those days. I don't time manage. I'm not saying I'm the only class. Um, but you need to be taking however many or one of those days to be studying for your test on Monday because you will still be having your test on Monday. All right, so go ahead and complete the CCOT Economic Developments and then be prepared on Thursday to look at and start studying for your test on Monday. Bye, guys. Stay safe. Boop, boop, boop. I need to end the recording.